Welcome everybody. We're here today to talk about the current investment environment for gaming studios. We'll be focused more on the mobile side, but certainly can try to speak a bit more on the PC console opportunities as well. And specifically, we'll be talking about 6 things. Number 1, what are investors investing in right now? 2, what's missing from an opportunities perspective? In other words, what are some of the biggest problems that need to be solved? Number 3, investing in the current environment as far as pandemic and shelter in place and how that's affecting investments. 4, how defensible are gaming companies? 5, what's controversial in the games industry today? And finally, what are big future trends in gaming? And with us today to speak about all these issues and more, I'm very happy to have our guest today, Jason Chapman, Managing Partner of Konvoy Ventures, David Gartner, General Partner at London Venture Partners, and Graham Gockley, Principal at the very new Transcend Fund. So welcome guys. Again, I'm really excited to have you guys on. I was telling Graham earlier that there are a lot of questions here that I'm personally just very interested in hearing the answers to. So I'm definitely looking forward to our conversation. But maybe we could just go ahead and start with like a quick intro from the 3 of you, and maybe starting with you, Jason.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thanks for having us on, Joe. I appreciate it. Yeah, so we launched Konvoy Ventures in 2019. Before that, I worked in product and research at IBM. So there's 3 of us on the team that launched Konvoy. We hired a star associate that's also on our team, which is great. We chose to focus on more of the infrastructure and platforms in gaming over content. We have done a couple of content deals. And so I'm going to look to my I don't want to use the word colleagues, but co-funds here on the podcast that have a lot more experience with investing directly into studios. But that's us. That's where we were focused on, and we're based in Denver, Colorado, and New York City. Invest in Europe, North America, and also done a couple things in Israel too. So that's us.
Great, David.
I'm with London Venture Partners, one of the funds that are focused on the games space exclusively. I think that many people may know some of our investments in the past. We were early investors in Supercell and Unity and Natural Motion, Playfish, a few of those, which is great. But we've done about 34 investments now, I think. We're also focused on the Western market, so North America, Europe, et cetera. About 60–70% of our investments are in Europe, but increasingly more so in the USA. I think that's because venture in the past has been shy of investing in the game space. So it's, and it's a global business. So people have been moving around. But, yeah, happy to get more into it as we talk.
Great. Graham?
Yeah, as Joseph said, I'm here representing Transcend Fund. We're a brand new fund. We launched just earlier this year in March. But yeah, we're investing in games and games-related digital media businesses. We've already made a handful of investments and continue to make more. My partner and I have been both on the product side, the production side, the corporate development, and business development side of the games business here for the last 10 years for my part, 30 years on Shanti's part. So we focus exclusively on games companies, and really try to work with the best founders and partner with them to build really great games businesses.
Awesome. All right, so maybe we could jump right in with the very first question, which is really, what are you guys investing in right now? What's sort of hot in the industry to invest in?
Well, I'm happy to start on that. We just announced an investment in a team called Treehouse based in California, who are some ex-Riot guys working on a mobile product. So certainly if you want to touch on that, I mean, it's mobile is an example there. It's content. Another interesting couple of investments that were made before that, Double Loop Games that Emily Greer started. She's ex-head of Congregate, working on games that are going to excite, I think, it's too easy to say a female audience, because it really doesn't do justice to the broader demographic of people who just don't want competitive games. And also Jill, who founded Robin Games, who's working on an entire lifestyle type product, which I think is super interesting. So for me, those all define products that are trying to move into new demographic areas, expanding the market, looking at players that maybe would not self-identify as gamers in the past. And I think that's one of the very exciting trends that we're seeing with devices everywhere. Finally, we can see content that's for the wider audience.
Right. Jason, Graham, do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think that's very exciting. I love the trend that David's hitting on with, moving into new demographics that maybe weren't focused on. Another one that I kind of throw out there is Dorian too, which, I think the evolution of, players versus creators is constantly blurring. And so, something that I would sort of just add on to that point of very excited about, new groups that weren't gamers becoming gamers, but I'm also really excited about new groups of people that weren't creators becoming creators. And I know that UGC is a very, very big, hot button topic. And I know that one of the things that a lot of people get excited about, but genuinely that is something that I think we're going to see as we kind of step into the next couple 100 million gamers. We're going to unearth a lot of new creators in that process, which I'm really pumped about.
Got it. So it sounds like, demographic expansion, kind of like potential for creator platforms. To what extent are, there's kind of a joke in the industry that VCs try to chase these like keyword terms, whether it's the metaverse or, games as a social network or things like that. Yeah. So to what extent are you guys looking at, and I guess a positive way to think about that is like trying to bet on big macro trends. So in terms of investing, in terms of themes or trends relative to like specific, entrepreneurs that come in that excite you guys, how are you guys thinking about the sort of investment framework, or what's the mental model in terms of thinking about investments in those terms?
I think it does depend a lot on who comes through the door. I think you're right. If it's, if you're getting a, just use an extreme. If Ilka and some of the Supercell guys came and said, "Hey, we're starting a new company," you go, "Right, sign me up." "Oh yeah, what was the company again?" "Oh yeah, you're making snowmobiles." "Oh, okay." So you do. I think one filter is you say, okay, is that a crowded space? Are you trying to do something that's hard? And then if the team's credibility is incredible, you'd say, yeah, go ahead and do it. Normally, we're saying, go into blue ocean space because it's really super hard on mobile. But Jill Wilson from Robin's is really interesting because she's a very experienced leader, had a senior position at Jam City. So she's not a newbie doing what she's doing. And she's also focusing on where the market, I think, is headed. So that, in some ways, is an ideal. It was an easy yes for us. She could have probably said, "Yeah, I'm going to do, I'm going to do storytelling games or match 3 or whatever," and we probably would have done it. But we like the combo. So I think it really does depend on who walks in the doors. Is the ultimate answer for that question to me.
Graham, Jason, do you guys agree with that, or?
Yeah, I'd second that. I think we filter mostly on the quality of the founders, their experience, and then the business opportunity that they are pursuing. So when we evaluate all of that, it's very rare for us to go after just a key market or a key buzzword in the market and filter on that. There are a lot of talented teams attacking things like the metaverse or attacking user-generated content, and there are just like just tons of teams going after those opportunities. But really the quality of the team, the experience, what they've been working on is really important, and how they're transferring that experience into the new product and the new category that they might be creating is the most exciting thing. So at early stage, it's really hard to filter on a thesis like that. I think people have to remember that VCs have 2 jobs. It's not only to go out and talk to the founders, but also to represent ourselves to our LPs and our investors. So sometimes what gets put out in the market is more of the marketing speak that is attracting LPs and other investors to invest in your own fund, and that's a great marketing tactic. But when you're actually going out and talking to founders, you're usually getting to more granular level and talking about specific game mechanics, specific ways that you want to target an audience, as opposed to a broader trend or buzzword.
Yeah, I think the only thing, I agree with both of them. I think the thing that I would just kind of add is, you're always struggling to not be just totally reactive, but also thinking proactively. And so that's kind of what we're getting at is, how do you identify trends that cross the market and be like, these are the few things I'd want to take from this startup to the next one that, it's missing, right? So for instance, there's a lot of really crowded markets, but a couple of companies are doing a few things really, really well. And you're just constantly storing that information kind of like a bank as you continuously evaluate things in that subsector. Something we're doing as a team right now, we're actually trying to do is we have this living, breathing thesis document. So if you want to think of it as like the constitution of Konvoy and how we're thinking about different subsectors. And every week we're taking a couple hours and we're taking a subsector and saying, this is how we think about it. We're updating it from like a couple months ago of how we think about it. And it's kind of like a lively debate amongst the team. And we're finding that to be helpful. And we're even seeing ourselves over time, just, we're less excited about one area versus the other. And why is that, right? Is it because we saw a couple of deaths in that subsector? Are we being influenced by that? So that's something we're doing to sort of try to track being proactive and reactive.
Yeah, I do think that's a very interesting topic, though, in terms of investing, in terms of teams versus markets, right? And I think one of my friends who's in the sort of Silicon Valley venture capital community told me a joke that he felt that Silicon Valley venture guys prior to YouTube always said teams were the most important, but after YouTube, they're like, actually markets are more important. Now they just kind of don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. It can be both. You sometimes you use your intuition maybe too strongly, but you are looking for reasons to invest. So you might say, you know what, that's a real interesting thesis on a part of the market I'd never considered before. No teams have pitched that, so let's get behind it. Right. I think even somebody with a high reputation came in and was pitching a VR product, we would find it very hard to invest. We were early. We called the VR kind of charade early on to say it's just not ready for prime time, and we made no investments in that space. And I think so. That came from internal debate, and then we did a big trip to say, okay, let's really look at this. We spent time in China. We looked at all the installations, and we just didn't feel like it was fun for a 15-minute session, but we just saw there were too many blockers to make it a scaled business up until now. I mean, always still hoping to be convinced, but. Got it.
And maybe kind of shifting to this next question around what's missing in terms of the biggest problems. And David, you had alluded to the opportunity in terms of demographic expansion. Jason, you mentioned, creator platforms, but what are other problems or big opportunities that you guys are seeing in the market, if we're talking about markets a bit more?
I mean, I think we definitely alluded to it with, the next couple 100 million gamers, right? If we saw anything in COVID, it's that we saw people, are stuck inside, and a lot of them turn to games, and a lot of new people turn to games, which is really, really exciting, right? I think not all those users are going to stick around, and we're seeing, early metrics of that. But generally speaking, I think we just expedited the acquisition of the next couple 100 million gamers, which is really, really neat. Mm-hmm. And so looking towards those gamers, again, what kind of niche genres are going to be created that we didn't think of before, right? And that's what I'm personally really pumped about is, I want to find personally the platforms that is fueling creators for niche genres that personally I don't play, maybe I'll never play, but have a viral community. Someone that did this really, really well was Crunchyroll, right? They tapped into the anime market perfectly, right? They fueled that market, they owned that market. I want to find the Crunchyroll of, the next couple, genres of gaming. So that's something I'm looking for constantly and chatting with both of David and Graham about.
Great. What about some of these notions around, that's kind of popular in the media as far as metaverse, sandbox creation platforms, things like that? What do you guys think about the opportunities in some of the more popular things being discussed?
Yeah, I think it's hard to maybe define metaverse. I mean, that's probably defining any of these terms is probably one of the hardest parts of marketing them, and then understanding and creating a conversation with the founder group about what they're trying to build. When we talk to people about metaverses or MMOs, I think there's a long history of MMOs, so it's very hard for kind of a new person to come into this space and say that building an online community is this new thing that can only be enabled in 2020. I think that's a hard pitch to somebody who's been around games for as long as this group has. But when you think about the platforms that can exist, as Jason was saying, the amount of different gameplay and storytelling that can happen in games right now has been democratized to the extent where anybody can build a game. I've been talking to a lot of creators on Roblox recently, and it's very interesting to see the ways that they're trying to innovate around building gameplay for that audience. I think one of the things that Jason was touching on is just building the community aspect of it as well. I think that's something that hasn't necessarily been there, even as games have evolved and become great kind of engines for content and gameplay. I think only now are we really scratching the surface of how to leverage the community, both inside the game and outside the game. So when you think about things like Bunch that are allowing people to play and video chat with each other, or as David mentioned, Treehouse is really thinking about community in terms of a co-op game. The founders that are putting that front and center in terms of the way they understand their audience I think are going to have a leg up, just because the tools that they have to then retain that audience and provide them with value over time have never been better. And they're going to find ways to create those games and build those communities over time, and just continue to aggregate where they might start out being niche, like Jason was saying, but then grow to be something mass market over time.
That's one of the extraordinary changes in games, is the way that the longevity, and it is all about the community, which I think is, I didn't really want to lead with this answer when you asked that question, because I feared it was too negative, but one of the greatest challenges is the ugly side of community, which is the toxic potential for toxicity. And it's so heartbreaking but yeah, so vital that the communities don't either kind of create mental illness or hate, or all kinds of terrible directions that it can run. So I think that's a big challenge that we have. Great that things are far more social, friendships are made, common goals are met. There's so many fantastic positive experiences. So I think work on the toxicity, and it's interesting to see that sometimes it's technology, but it's just getting the right tone of voice and not letting the audience take this thing in the wrong place to protect and encourage things. Like you never see anyone fighting in Disneyland. And I'm not sure that's because everyone's happy. That's because something like a tree opens up and the people just get sucked out of the park. So we need that kind of thinking.
I want to see that tree right there. What you're hitting on is this concept of what do you lose from being toxic, right? And a lot of people, there's nothing at risk, right? If I was going to be toxic in public at Disneyland, I might be removed from the park, or I might get, locked up for something I did or fined. There's something I have to risk. And, the problem with a lot of like cheating in gaming or just toxic behavior is that there's not much to risk. And so people are willing to be gutsy. And, I think, there's got to be some social element here to figure out a way to fix this, because you're right. It's heartbreaking. We've all been on multiplayer games, especially, and you're in there, and there's someone who's saying something that you've never even dreamed of. And you're just like, you're 14. How are you thinking like this? And if you hang out long enough, you can see why they think like this, because someone's ridiculed them in the previous game and they just kind of pass on bad behavior.
Or you're just fodder, I mean, I don't have the eye-hand coordination. I kind of go into these multiplayer first-person shooters, and I am toast within seconds, right? Where's the dad mode where my aiming, the golfing handicap gets applied, and I get a little extra bonus skills that buffs that my competitors don't have yet.
So you're saying I shouldn't queue up for you for Warzone or for CS:GO? That's what you're telling me.
No, but I got a teenager I can bring in on my side.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I think something I'm really passionate about. There's a lot of people trying to figure this out, and I know that most people in the games community want the same thing, which is, we don't want this. We don't want to influence kids or create a safe place for kids to behave a certain way. Like, I don't want it to be a no risk situation to act like that, right? Like to act poorly and ridicule and shame people. And, something just really frank, like what I try to do whenever I hear that is, I don't just like to mute that person, which I do all the time, but I also like to ridicule them and say, stop talking to that person, or, just jump in, have some guts and say, hey, look, we're not okay with that. Because usually they're picking on one person, and that's bullying. That's terrible. So I would just encourage all you guys on multiplayer to stand up. I mean, you have nothing to lose would be also the thing I'd tell you.
Right. And maybe in terms of opportunities from a team perspective, it does seem like there's been a trend of gaming studios getting funded that are like ex Riot, ex Blizzard, guys like that. Can you guys speak in terms of why you think that kind of trend is happening?
Well, I think there is a life cycle, right? If you're on a project and you've been on that project for 5 to 10 years and you want to do something new, and that opportunity doesn't exist at those companies. And we saw it at Electronic Arts all the time, where you're tired of being on the 10th version of Madden football, and you're ready for something new. So I think that's one of the roles that we play as investors. We help that ecosystem take that talent, very talented people that want to then get the backing and support to try something new. And for us, the risk is so improved because they are experienced, and particularly some of I have to say, even though we haven't invested in every ex-Riot person, there's clearly a culture and a discipline at Riot that's pretty impressive, and people are impacted by that, and they come out and you see that the way that they process things, the way they are organized, it puts them in a great position. So I like that, and I think we're going to see obviously more of that, and it's good for the industry.
Okay, great. So maybe shifting to the next question, which is really around investing in this current environment of pandemic, shelter in place. So you can't have in-person meetings. I know there are some venture firms who are pretty public about not investing in companies without an in-person meeting. Not only that, but we're kind of seeing this potential for a recessionary, depressionary environment. But the countervailing side of that is that gaming is kind of on the increase. So can you guys speak to the current environment and how it's affecting your processes, or how it's affecting, how you're going about evaluating and investing in companies right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest changes is the four of us actually probably be having this conversation at a conference or at some other type of public event that is great at bringing together people from the industry internationally, and that's where we do a lot of our networking. That's where we meet a lot of new people, and increase the size of our networks and the people that we know. The fact that that's not happening naturally and organically right now is very difficult and challenging. So I think we're all trying to find different ways to meet new teams, meet talented founders, make sure that we're getting the same kind of high quality conversations that we would be getting in a non-COVID environment. In terms of kind of closing deals and evaluating, I don't think much has changed, other than we shifted from in-person meetings to a lot more Zoom calls. Getting a level of comfort there, I'm not sure how Jason and David are dealing with it, is a little bit different, especially if you haven't met the person previously.
Weirdly, I'd even argue it's weirdly better. I mean, I'm more confident answering this question than I was 3 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Partly because it is, quote, the new normal, and we've done multiple investments now where we did not physically meet the team. But the reason it's better is that it forces us to be more disciplined with references. And I think it was too easy in the past to fall into a trap where you would meet someone, and if it was a good meeting, that would sort of set the positioning, and that kind of first impression would set the train in motion. And you'd say, I really like what they're pitching. I like that team. I think they're great. Then you might do some references, and they may or may not come back as positively as you had in your head. And it's very hard to make these decisions when you spend 1 or 2 hours with someone, and you take references from people that may have worked with them or know them for hundreds of hours. And you probably should be listening to those references more. Now we have no choice, and I think we're getting more objective data, and that's helping us be more disciplined with our decisions. But deals are definitely being done. Follow-on investments are definitely being done. And as you mentioned, the game sector, and I've been speaking to various bankers about M&A things. They're saying it's red hot in gaming. So I think this is a great time. It's such a digital market, and it's global. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I would.
I'm shy to say it. I feel bad for some people who are not in, but yeah, we're lucky.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's something just to add on to that of time is your friend with deals, in my opinion. Like we've all fallen in love with a deal, and then a couple weeks later been like, that's actually not. Something surfaces, whether it's about the founder, the team, the market. And I think actually COVID's given us a little bit more breathing room on deal times. That's at least for us. We've seen that I think we're actually making better decisions because we are jumping on way more Zoom calls with our founders ahead of it. We have actually, I think, more touch points. And, just to echo, we do and have to get very creative about how we get references for a person, right? Now, circling in around eight different ways on this one founder to just find if there's any skeletons in the closet. We do that better now than I think we did before. So I'd echo that. The thing that we're also seeing is there's a flooding of, generalist funds that, part of their portfolio is on fire, not in a good way, and, burning to the ground right now. And they're like, shoot, we're, a third of LA allocated through this fund. We need to look towards, new horizons, which they should be doing, which is a good, for their own LPs. And they've looked at gaming, right? And so we're seeing a lot of people, we've seen a massive uptick in generalist funds reaching out to us, which I appreciate of, hey, how do I play this sector? How do I get into this sector? So I don't know if, you guys are seeing this as well, but it is interesting to see a lot of people that have, paused allocating because, their traditional sectors are on fire. And they're now trying to get a POV on how to allocate in gaming, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that generally, when that plays through is bad investments get made, and then that actually dirties the water a bit because people then wonder, oh, game's such a good investment. The classic criticism of gaming is it's a hits-driven business. And the answer is yes. And what's the problem with that? And the problem then becomes when people aren't actually building a portfolio and they take 1, 2, or 3 shots and they actually fail. I mean, who making games hasn't had to make mini games before they got their success out the door? It's the same thing with investing. So I just try to encourage those investors to really allocate a decent amount of capital, make multiple investments, and not just or follow on in companies that are already just successful and looking for growth capital, because that's a different decision tree.
Yeah. All right. So it sounds like, based upon the feedback so far, like the current environment hasn't really slowed you down, and potentially
It did initially.
Okay, initially.
But nowadays, I think it's the new normal.
And
yeah,
Jason,
and in
some
ways, it's opened up it's kind of leveled the playing field such that we can, instead of talking to a founder who's based in London and saying, yes, I'll be there in July, let's have a meeting kind of 2 months from now or whatever that natural touch point would be, we can just hop on a Zoom call tomorrow. So in some ways, a lot of the ways that it was paced in terms of how we would meet new people, that's kind of all been accelerated, and it's been much easier to meet new people. It's also been easier to meet new people in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect, and actually meet founders from more diverse backgrounds. So I think in a weird way, it's actually advantaged a lot of founders to reach out to us, because we have less logistical barriers in our schedules and in our time management to meet new people.
Right. So potentially less geographical bias. I think some Silicon Valley guys are famous for saying they only invest within a certain square mile radius of, Menlo Park or whatever. But
yeah.
And then in terms of valuation, so Jason, you're saying that there's money now kind of shifting in. Is that impacting valuations in a positive way, despite potentially recessionary, depressionary concerns as well? Or do those offset?
So interesting enough, right? So we just did a little bit of a study on this, of the deal flow we've seen since kind of like March to now.
Yeah.
Right. On average, valuations still have plummeted.
Okay.
In some regards, so about 20% is what we're seeing on seed deals and Series A deals, right, from where it was before. So, if you were raising it at $10 million valuation, you're now raising it at $8 million. So nothing crazy, but it has gone down. And I think a lot of that has to do with founders, maybe having slight fear of, hey, this is an unsure environment. I do want to sort of round this round up. I don't want to take, 12 months to raise this round. Let's just get this moving. I want to make it attractive for investors. That's what we've seen. The other thing I would say is I think that the valuation spike will come as more of those guys that have been trying to create a POV on this industry actually do start pulling the trigger. Because I don't think a lot of them are pulling the trigger. I think a lot of them are just looking at it and trying to figure out what they want to do with it. That's kind of my hunch. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you see valuations go up a little bit in like Q4 and Q1.
Okay. Great. And so the next question I want to ask you guys is actually, I don't want to open up a can of worms, but in terms of when we think about defensibility of gaming companies, I think there's kind of a debate, is there like an Amazon-like or Fang-like type of gaming company? And so wondering like what your perspective is.
You mean other than Tencent?
Yeah. Transcend, Roblox, yeah. But there's a firm NFX that's kind of famous for talking about network effects. But when we look at a lot of the game content companies, we don't see a lot about that. But just wondering if you guys could speak a little bit high level in terms of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting question because I think, and Graham was speaking about it earlier as well, with games that might start out niche and then grow. I think the dynamic has changed so dramatically from, we used to jokingly call it at EA, we were in the fruit business because you'd ship something and it'd go into retail and it would start spoiling. You kind of made your big giant day one orders. You try to get as much through the door in the first 60 days and then you moved on to the next release. Completely reversed now. The games that, Roblox is how old is Roblox now? Is it 8 years old? 12?
Yeah, I think it's 12.
Getting stronger every year. So most people are that have community and therefore online component, etc., report their largest ever years. And I think that is changing just the general growth curve. But even if I think about EA, and EA had all kinds of defensibility strategies and all the kind of classics business school theory. So it tried to own and control distribution. It built franchises. It did all these great things, and it is a huge success. But I would say, distribution no longer is valuable. In fact, they're unwinding most of the distribution because it's a cost overhead. We all know you go to distribution through digital now, so they're on Steam, and so that's no longer an asset. But EA is still having its best year ever. But now they're not the only game in town. So now we've got, I was joking about Tencent, but Tencent's another good example. Tencent has been born out of another era. And so I think platforms spawn these companies that are hugely successful, and they don't go away. They don't seem to have a life cycle, but they don't own and exclusively control anything either. Then something else comes near them and also does well. So Supercell, has come out of the mobile era, King and other mobile companies. And so I don't know about 50 years. That seems long in game terms since it's longer than the history of the industry, but it doesn't seem to be quite the same system of like, how Netflix destroyed Blockbuster Video, where that company is completely gone. It seems to be quite different in the game space. That was my view.
Yeah, I'll hop in. I agree with everything David said. I think when we think about IP in games, yes, there's always going to be great differentiated content, and the most talented teams are going to build the next great franchises. There's hundreds, thousands of games that have yet to be built yet that are going to be massive hits. So that's always exciting to us. There's going to be a constant thirst for that kind of new IP. And then once you have an IP, I think what's most interesting is what you can do with it. And right now, I think once you own that audience, I think we've moved from a product line, like David was saying with Fruit, to more of a software games as a service model, in which once you own the audience and understand what they want and what they need, you can continue to provide them with value in terms of different gaming content for years to come. And that's a really exciting relationship that you can build with that audience, and you can learn more about them over time. So I think there's a defensibility there that is more like a tech company than an entertainment company, but it also brings kind of the best of both of those worlds together in terms of what you can give that audience.
I was just going to say, like, I think you asked the question also around like Supercell and Zynga, like which one of those would be around in 50 years? Like, and I really thought about that for a while. I was like, okay, like what would justify them to be around in 50 years? And then, comparing to iconic, brands like Disney or a Nintendo. And it's like, is Farmville going to be the Mickey Mouse of Disney? I don't think so. I think a really key part of becoming a defensible brand that has the moat like of an Amazon or a Microsoft is can you translate platforms? And I don't know if Zynga or Supercell is going to be able to do that ultra well. I mean, we'll see. Whatever the next platform is, right? I hope they can, because I'm fans of of Farmville, Clash of Clans. I love those games, but that's something that's top of mind is can you jump platforms? Can you move from PC to mobile to like a UGC? I think that's going to be a big part of like what survives and what becomes the quote unquote Nintendo of gaming.
Right, but Graham, I think you made a good point in the sense that to some degree, the free-to-play operating model serves as a defensibility, because now we're, instead of like a unit sold business, we're in an industry where you've got a product that can retain a customer for 5, 10, 15 years. So certainly that's kind of an interesting point to think about as well.
Yeah, and then when you think about the platform side of things, like Jason was saying, that's ultimately incredibly defensible on both sides. If you have somebody that's creating content for you, as well as you're maintaining the audience and growing that over time, that's fantastic. So when you look at something like Roblox, that's exciting. And then you look at something like Manticore that's trying to build a similar product for maybe a slightly older audience. I think there's an exciting opportunity there if they hit it right. In terms of how you build that business, it's actually almost more complicated because it's dual-sided. You think about both the supply and demand side of things, and then how to bring them together. So it's actually more like 3 businesses. So making sure you have the right leadership team that understands how to grow that and scale that over time is even more important. But if there is success there, it is highly defensible because you have just market dynamics on all sides of it that advantage it to continue to grow and to continue for the quality of the content quality to get better over time.
Great, but I feel like we're agreeing too much. So in terms of like having more debate and controversy, I wanted to shift to our next question, which is, what is controversial in the games industry today? What can we argue about, guys?
Okay, I can kick us off with a controversial topic, so we'll see if the counterparts here agree with me. So something that is very top of mind to me is the way that ad networks are purchasing up studios, and how they're creating a customer adversarial relationship. That's very, very topical to me. It kind of reminds me of, there's a reason, right, in investment banks, right, you have a wall between your sales and trading and your investment banks, right? There's a reason that the two cannot cooperate. That is no longer happening for games and ads. And so just for everyone to understand, I'm sure that a lot of the audience does know this, but they can use the data of their customers to get a UA advantage for their own studios. And 30 to 40% spend for a lot of studios is on UA, and that's where a bulk of budgets go, is to acquire new users, maintain users. That is a clear problem, in my opinion. And it needs to get fixed with some kind of legislation potentially, or I think that you're just going to see all their clients leave. So that's something that's kind of topical for me right now.
But isn't that the curing? Look, I mean, I think it is a problem, but I just kind of view the free market as the tool to sort it out. We've had the same issue with Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo. Nintendo maybe is an even better example that's maybe arguing that, which is the platform holders had cost advantages because they didn't have to pay their own platform fees. So I think if content is truly king, you will find that those ad networks struggle to balance great product and running the actual utility of the ad network. So I think that if users, people are going to go where they have the great experiences, where their community is, therefore where the eyeballs are, the ads will have to follow. So I think there is some competition in play that will push back on that.
There's a lot of private Slack groups where people are privately furious, but publicly they don't say a lot.
Yeah, because they don't want their ads messed up.
But we're also seeing this in other industries too, right? Like Amazon recently got caught for taking the data of their sellers and then using that data to inform what products they should buy. So very similar in that sense. So it's a problem, but I feel like a lot of people in the industry are like, well, what can we do? So
I guess I would want transparency, and maybe that's being a little bit.
Yeah, transparency is always good.
Yeah,
I think that's true. People should also, and at a user level, people should know what's going on with their data, and that's still a bigger fight with the whole internet too.
And I guess I go and also wonder is, and maybe Joe, actually, you could probably comment on this too, is like, as a small studio, like maybe not everyone is totally aware of how their data is being used. And I know that you're keenly aware because this is a topic you've dove into yourself, but I think that's like one of the things I'm trying to hit at is I want those guys to know if they're going to use that ad network, that information will potentially be used against them. Obviously, that it's not evidence that they 100% do that. So that's a big disclaimer. Like, there is not a direct correlation, but that's what I would guess as a platform. If you had that information, why would you not use it? And there's nothing stopping them from, in my opinion, right? And so I would guess that they are to create a competitive edge on the UA spend, which is, as you guys know, could be everything, right? If you can move your UA spend from 40% to 10, I mean, that's huge. That's a game changer.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think on the studio side, it's really just about weighing risks for us. It's like, what advantage do we get, and what's the potential risk? Will this information be used against us, or will it be used in different kinds of ways that could?
Do you feel you have choice? I mean, do you sort of feel like, well, that's the pound of flesh we have to give up in order to get?
I think that's the current attitude right now. Is that, again, privately, a lot of people are incredibly furious, but at the end of the day, in terms of what people are saying publicly, in terms of like, like you look at Playrix, like, I mean, talking to some of the guys there, they're like, well, we're gonna, if we can buy that app love and traffic now, we'll buy it, because they already got our info.
Yeah, exactly. That's so interesting. I'm curious to see how ads shake out, and obviously, Apple's announcement, that's a game changer too. In this it's very linked to this whole, it's tangential to this topic. I'm curious to see how marketing is done. I think marketing for users is going to dramatically change in the next couple of years in games, which drives a lot of the revenue and spend. And so
but that's a platform reset, isn't it? I mean, that's an opportunity.
Yeah. And I think, I'm thinking about how to play that space too, actively right now, because obviously if you can capture some of those dollars, that's great. And, as you challenge, Facebook and Google, Facebook owning, your interests, and Google knows your intent with your searches. I mean, those are two behemoths that don't want to be disrupted. And I think games might be the catalyst to figure out a way to maybe capture back some of that spend. And so that's something I would be pretty pumped to find.
Yeah, I do think that's, definitely a lot of changes there. Will Facebook be able to continue to do high levels of targeting or not? So will types of games, because of the lack of targeting, decrease and we have to go broader or more casual? That's we'll definitely see how that shakes out. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Any other controversial topics that we can?
That's the most controversial we could be. How about esports? Has anyone made any money in esports other than Twitch? And
isn't there one profitable team?
Isn't 100 Thieves profitable? Am I making that up? That might be fake news.
On their swag and their like fashion drops. I mean,
I thought I heard there was one.
I mean, because it is. I mean, esports is great for the industry, but it's still, in my mind, is really more a promotion. It's a marketing activity. It's not a business, and if business is about generating cash flow, and I guess there are a lot of definitions of business, but to me, it just doesn't seem. It just seems stuck in that sponsorship swag, et cetera, et cetera. And look, I'm glad that people love it, and tons and millions of people are watching it, and that's all cool, and that's really great. But I would love to be able to make a profitable investment in the space, but all the money that's being poured into that, I can't see it getting the returns. And so,
yeah, we get pitched on an esports team just about every week, and I think there were a couple opportunities very early on to make a bet in a few great orgs, and make, a good investment that's going to hopefully return money. A lot of people describe esports teams to me as art. You're kind of investing, waiting for somebody to come and the next billionaire to come along and say, no, this Monet is actually worth 200 million now instead of 150.
Yeah.
It kind of falls into that realm usually for me. I think some teams are getting creative by, leveraging their brand, and they're kind of honestly becoming more of like an Adidas or a Nike of just saying, you want the 100 Thieves brand, or you want the Cloud9 brand. And I know, I agree with you, David. I like watching esports, but there's a reason our portfolio does not have esports exposure. And it's because, you got to chase the money. And, a lot of, when we talk to our LPs and investors, right, everyone talks about esports. And I'm like, okay, gaming's over $150 billion market. Esports maybe is 1.5. So it's, 1 to 1.5%, depending on how you cut the market. That's the scope of the industry. So if you say, hey, I have $1 billion TAM, and usually esports claims the gaming market as their TAM, which I don't think is fair. It doesn't carry. And so there's a reason I think a lot of people are also going to lean out of esports. It's kind of like the similar, in my mind, blockchain lean out. You saw a lot of investors get really hopped up on blockchain, and they're like, oh shoot, how do we make money? And I think that, that's sort of happening in esports as well.
Yeah, I feel like every esports deck has that graph where it shows the monetization per esports fan, and then the monetization of the major sports leagues. And the assumption being that over time they'll just straight line to the monetization of the NFL, and that that'll just happen eventually. I think we're seeing a lot of challenges to that, and figuring out what type of business models that are going to work. I mean, obviously the NFL and the kind of Euro football leagues have all made very successful audience expansions and figured out ways to monetize the audience. Esports is completely digital and trying to figure out a way to do that in a completely different economic system and economic age. And we've yet to find kind of business models that have been sustainable and scalable over time. And there might be some short-term arbitrage. I think Jason was pointing out that the brands are an interesting way to do that if you're a team. And then the definition of esports is also kind of expanding, not just from the competition, but also on the Twitch side of things in terms of what gets streamed and what happens there on the audience side. I think we're a little bit more excited about that if teams can figure out how to leverage live streaming or other types of content delivery vehicles to aggregate audiences, figure out interesting ways to interact with them, and maybe monetize them on that side of things. I think there's incredible opportunities to be had there, but as David said, nothing's really kind of come to light yet that would make us feel like we should be as bullish as some people out there are, or as the larger media landscape might want to make it feel like esports is.
What do you guys think about these flash ads that are essentially happening where, Apex did this with, they wanted to promote, the launch, right? And they got all the streamers for a couple days, just purely streaming Apex. And I see that as an opportunity for esports teams, but what do you guys think about that mechanism? I mean, Riot did this as well. Where you had to watch
like Twitch drops and stuff like
key
that.
drops.
Yeah. Like, what do you guys think about that marketing mechanism? Do you think it's actually sticky, or do you think it's just flash in the pan kind of thing, where it's like, it's really cool for a couple days, or do you think it's actually going to stick? Like, do you think those users stick around? I can tell you, I've played Valorant. I really like Valorant, by the way. It's a really, really fun game, but I went back to playing CSGO. And a lot of people claimed it was going to be the CSGO killer. And if you look at CSGO Steam numbers, that's obviously not happening. I'm very biased. Love that game. Probably will till I die. But I don't know if you guys thought about that marketing mechanism, which is
first of all, it's genius marketing. I mean, it's getting people to sample and to move communities like that. But I think there's a lot of that depends on the game. And then of course, once you see 100 of those every month, then it's not going to feel quite so special. So I guess we have to see how it plays out. But maybe not everyone has the budget to do that. Maybe that's the self-limiting factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that on the PC console side, that influencers and Twitch is the new marketing, right? That's what drives all the traffic on that side. And so to your point, at least it got you in the door, right? So top of funnel, that's where it's at. And then bottom of funnel, it's always going to come down to the product. So
yeah, it's going to come down to the product. And then smart marketers their job isn't just to engage you that first time, which is great that Jason got a key and got to play a few hours of Valorant.
That was special. That was special. Yeah. I did feel special when I got it. I have to admit, I felt like I won something. It was ridiculous. I was like,
that's a pushback on the ad networks, right? It's another outlet.
yeah, it is.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So it's great that Jason kind of got in the door there, but as kind of we move to these more games as a service, live operations models, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is retaining them, re-engaging them over time. So I think marketers are not only going to have to kind of figure out the short-term arbitrage of finding the best hot upcoming influencer to peddle their product, they're going to need to figure out how to do that replicably over time. And as you're seeing, like a lot of these streamers, like, yeah, they'll play Valorant or they'll play Apex for a little bit, and then they just go back to Fortnite or whatever their natural audience likes to watch them play. So I think there's going to be a lot of intelligence that's going to happen around figuring out what the audience wants and figure out how to partner with the best influencers over time to keep them engaged, to keep them even deeper engaged with the product, such that when you have a live update or something like that, you automatically pull back in those influencers or pull back in the players to self-promote and get more content out into the ecosystem to keep the flywheel going.
Yeah. Do you think that's a statement on the quality of the game, or is that more a statement on the size of the audience? You know, Fortnite just has more players, so it's naturally, you know, it's a bigger fishing pond for the influencers, or are they saying actually Fortnite's just a much better game, and so that's
I don't know. I also think there's just kind of a concept of familiarity. It's like,
yeah,
that's what
I mean, where your friends are, I guess. Oh,
yeah.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And how many games can you have loyalty at once? I mean, I can only read like 2 books at once. I can't read 10 because I can't get my head around it. But I don't know.
That's what I've understood. I don't know if you guys saw the comment from Reed Hastings on Netflix. His biggest competition is Fortnite. You know, because I think ultimately all the media companies realize that it's time available in the week, and maybe that's one of the, you know, back to one of the earlier questions. It's that fight for share of mind, share of time, particularly now with this generation that's so digital and so happy to be in and out multitasking.
You know,
go ahead.
I was going to it's going to be a slight tangent of a pivot here, but, you know, kind of what you're hitting at is time in the week, right? We're all battling for that time. And, you know, something I've thought of quite a bit about is, I don't know if any of you guys have dove into the concept of universal basic income. But, you know, as we start to become more efficient, you know, less jobs might be needed. And therefore the concept is, you know, what are we going to do with people that maybe there isn't a job that is needed to be done? And obviously you need to support those people and help them best you can.
Content creators,
exactly. What do you think they're going to do? And, you know, I think there's a strong correlation and argument to be made that, you know, gaming will continue to rise as our leisure time continues to grow, which is inevitable given that we're becoming more efficient. So I don't know if you guys have thought about that at all. It's a slight tangent, but it hits on that topic of there's a finite number of time everyone wants it, and people are going to spend it somewhere, and people continuously just choose 2-way media versus 1-way media, which is gaming, versus Netflix or Amazon Prime, because they can impact the actual outcome of what they're doing and viewing. So kind of an open-ended question. If you guys
this is a glimpse into the future, basically.
Yeah. Look, I think human. I think most people desire to perform and to have meaning. Of course, have meaning, and so you tied into that is this idea of working and producing. So I think if that's where gaming can provide more meaning, and we can build something beautiful that's digital. And I have to give credit to Hilmar at CCP, who told me about this concept. He says, you know, the world needs gaming because as the standard of living moves up for everyone, the planet cannot support the industrial destruction needed to build all these fancy goods and everything else. We need to be satisfied when we have a digital version of something, because it doesn't have the same impact on planetary resources. So I think that's kind of interesting if you can derive some, hey, I've done something nice for another player, or I've designed some object that gets used content, you know, and these can provide kind of purpose and meaning. That are very real, and that can help complete that. Because I think the problem with universal basic income, I was going to call it UBI. I don't know if it's called that, but is that if it kind of strips you into a blob, that sounds horrible. So how do you can still contribute?
Yeah, that's very top of mind. It's like, meaning is everything, purpose is like you need that as a person. And how does gaming potentially play a big role into that with people having more time, and how do you create purpose in gaming moving forward? I
think the younger audience also has a very different take on it than even like the 20-year-olds have. So like I said, I've been talking to people who've been doing Roblox recently, and I think they've all kind of evolved from playing Minecraft to playing Roblox, and then they've reached this point where they've loved Roblox, they love doing it with their friends, and they realize that they either need to kind of create games themselves or start streaming games and creating or posting content to YouTube. And now I think this younger generation has a very different concept of how they want to express themselves within games. Whereas I think we would all been fine playing Mario Kart or GoldenEye for dozens of hours and just doing that as a linear experience. I think the younger audience thinks about it multi-directionally, and they think about it socially in terms of how they want to engage with their friends and how they want to create with them. So I think that's going to create an entirely different set of what games will be going forward. So I think it's going to be tying into the UBI, tying into the creator economy, however, the passion economy, whatever you want to define it in, getting back to buzzwords. There's just going to be a lot of opportunities there over time.
So maybe I could ask you guys about one last controversial topic before moving on to the last question. And probably just, as a game studio trying to raise funds, I think the one point that we've seen the most difference of opinion on is kind of our stance on work-life balance. And so I actually don't believe in work-life balance, but there are some people who strongly believe in it. And so that seems like the most controversial thing that I've been kind of coming across. I'm wondering if you guys have, certainly there's an issue in the industry in terms of, certain environments and stuff like that, but wondering if you guys have an opinion on that.
Well, I think there's probably multiple things in what you were commenting on there. There's some toxic workplaces, which is not just work-life balance. There's people not being respected properly as individuals, and so but I think work-life balance. If I'm talking about pure productivity, if I think about my own, I'm not highly disciplined. I have bursts of incredible productivity, but very inconsistently. So I can't do work-life balance. I have to and I'm very lucky now in the role that I'm in, that I can just work weird hours at night when I might be productive, and maybe not work the next day. And so I think everyone has a slightly different work format. So it sounds amazing when somebody says we are going to work from 9 to 5. There is no crunch. Everything's highly ordered. And if you can hire employees that can work in that fashion and be productive, and you can still meet your production goals and then hit the economic output that's necessary, and that sounds amazing. Personally, it would never work for me because I'm just not organized personally like that. But I believe they can exist. But nor do I believe someone should obviously be, chained to a desk. In the early days, when I first came to the UK, literally, people were like, all they could do, and they couldn't leave their office. The bosses drove Ferraris, and they hired underpaid people that they made them work every day of the week. And it's like, okay, that's like modern day slavery. So that's obviously not okay. So I like to hear how founders articulate their workplace, how that's going to work. But you want highly motivated people, and I don't know that I have a straight answer for that. Hopefully that provides some color. But
I know, great points.
Yeah, I think so. It's slightly different take on it, right? I love structure, and that's probably just because of my engineering background. I love I've got my 12-hour block. I'm going to crush it, and then I am done, right? And please do not call me, do not text me. I'm hanging out with my wife, having a great time, and I like the separation of even during COVID, it was really hard for me personally working from home because I like to separate work and home. And just kind of mentally that 5-minute drive to my office and then 5-minute drive back. It's like my transition time, where I get to blare some music, and just, change modes entirely. I also would say, there is a huge part for a Sabbath, like taking a Sabbath. There's a reason you need to take a Sabbath, and unplugging from work is, it's very topical for people to take, a break one day during the week. And so I try to do that on Sundays, just not work. I don't always do that, but I try to. And so, for you starting a startup, it's very easy to get burnt out. All three of us on this call have actually, launched funds, which are very, very similar to launching a startup. You're corralling tons of investors. I always joke with my founders saying, hey, look, I understand what it's like to pitch for capital. I'm just usually asking for more zeros in the end. Not always. Some of our founders are going on to raise probably more money than I ever will. And that's fantastic. I'm so stoked for them. But, in that process, I wish I had done a little bit better of separating my work and my life, where it integrated almost too much. And you start to tie a little bit too much of, I think, your value and purpose to your work, which can become, dangerous for you personally.
Yes, especially when you're not successful.
Yes, especially when you fail, which happens all the time. And my wife has had to pick me up many times when I've failed, and encourage me. So I think we've all been there. So
yeah, I agree with both David and Jason. I think there's like the illusion of having or achieving balance is it's more of an illusion than it is a reality. In the games industry particularly, I think as we move from more products that had a specific launch date, and therefore you need to crunch to get to that launch date, that's historically been the way that a lot of these studios have operated, to more live operations and service-based models. I think the studios, especially the smart studio leadership, are realizing that crunch is not sustainable. And if you want to keep your best talented employees for years, that again can support a game or a franchise or a set of games that can retain audiences for years, you want to keep the talent around, and therefore you can't be burning them out with 80, 100-hour weeks. You need to keep them motivated, give them the tools they need to be creative, give them the tools they need to feel productive if they're most productive at 2 a.m. versus if they're most productive at 10 a.m. in the office. I think COVID has also been interesting because a lot of us are working from home, and we're trying to figure out what's happened. Most of the teams that I've talked to are actually performing and feeling fairly productive in a remote environment, which is, I think, interesting. And again, makes me feel very fortunate to be in the gaming industry that's probably ahead of the curve in terms of embracing collaborative technologies and remote technologies and all the communication tools necessary for this type of development. How that evolves over time, I think, will be interesting, especially with globalization. If you're working with teams in Asia or South America and figuring out when you need to be online, I think that will stretch us to a different extent, maybe. But overall, like, I think the games industry is moving to a healthier place over time, and that's that gives me some hope in general.
Right. So I think each of you have actually touched upon a very interesting aspect of the work-life balance issue. So David, you talked about like the incentive structure, right? So it's like, so you've got like the executives at the game companies or the founders, and it's like, hey, you guys kill yourselves, make me rich. That's one problem.
I hope those days are gone. There's more equity sharing and stock option, but anyways, go on. No, it's kill yourself and make yourself rich, and me too.
Exactly. Yeah, right. That's a little bit more equitable. And then Jason, you're talking about the importance of, yeah, sure, you can work really hard, whether it's 12 hours or 16 hours, but having some points of rest or a break. And then, to what degree do you separate your work from your life, or do you integrate it? And, I think you want some form of separation. I personally like to integrate my work and life, and then Graham, your point about situational context, because I do think that, yes, like if there's a difference, I think, between the 0 to 1 problem where you're trying to create a new game, trying to find product market fit, which could get very intense relative to, a very predictable, consistent content cadence around a live operating model. So then, that kind of shifts the requirement for whether you need a lot of work and potentially unbalanced sort of work-life balance or not. But yeah, definitely, not to go into that too much and open up more of a can of worms. But So maybe we can wrap this up with our last question around what are the big future trends in gaming? What should we expect in the short term or longer term future in gaming?
Market expansion into new demographics. Definitely UGC. Sounds like we need a new customer relationship beyond the kind of private data snooping model. I don't know, where that goes. It's kind of despite my I always love new technology, so I'm always super hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist. So I'm hopeful that Apple will solve the AR thing and make it somehow magical, and we all have some kind of new fun piece of kit that we all want to buy and experience, and it transforms our digital life. But those are some vectors that are in my head.
I think I would also just add, I think you're going to see the pairing of gaming giants and technology giants, maybe in a new way, that maybe it's not the form of an acquisition, but it will almost be like strategic alliances, like, Roblox and Microsoft and like Epic and, AWS, I think it's really interesting as you go towards this metaverse. You need the ability to operate the metaverse, but then you also need the metaverse to be created, and neither of them have totally, in my opinion, the ability to do that. And so that's something I think is going to be very fascinating to watch over the next decade. Is if you ever see a scenario where an Epic gets bought out by one of these technology giants, I have no idea. Like, I think it's unlikely given the purchase price is getting so high. But I think that's going to be really interesting to watch and see kind of how people team up and pair off. And it's going to be kind of like school kids, like cliques, like going off to each other. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I'll second that one. I think everybody's been waiting for platform shifts. So as David said, everybody assumed 5 years ago that VR was going to be the next big platform, and everybody got excited about that. I was using a Quest for hours yesterday, loved it, but clearly hasn't expanded to a mass market experience for a large portion of people that love to game. That could get there eventually. I'm also hoping that Apple in the next few years releases something that blows our mind on the AR front and unlocks a new set of digital experiences. But if a platform change isn't going to happen, I think an ecosystem change could. So what Jason's pointing to in terms of like, are you aligning to the Amazon ecosystem in terms of how they might potentially integrate a game engine with the Twitch service over time, or something more like Apple, which is more like a walled garden, or Google, which is more open, or Sony and Microsoft, whatever they build. I feel like they're all going to have these little fiefdoms over time. They're going to have different incentives for developers to partner with them over time. And that's going to be very challenging for individual and small developers to figure out how to align themselves with all those powers and how those powers are going to help them grow and attract their audiences over time. So I think just a pitch for VCs. I think we're going to see that at first, because we're talking to all those platform holders, all those ecosystem leaders, and we're going to understand it from the perspective of all of our portfolio companies, and therefore might be able to help navigate our portfolio companies to the best possible situation for them over time. But it is going to be challenging, but exciting, because I think it is going to be a lot of funding, but the success criteria for each of those different outcomes is going to be different.
Okay, so maybe a final question underneath this topic is because Jason, you brought up the metaverse. So what is the metaverse?
I had to do it.
When does it get here?
Yeah, what is the metaverse? So I guess, all right, so I'll a few top things that are really like topical for it being a metaverse. It's something that's persistent. It's a fully functioning own economy is something I think that's important. It kind of spans both physical and digital. Those are things that are really important in the metaverse. Actually, everyone should go read Snow Crash. At first kind of exploring this topic, fascinating, by Neil Stevenson, really interesting. I think I'll start there. That's what I think the metaverse is, and who does it? I mean, Epic and Roblox are probably the best positioned, in my opinion, to attempt it right now, given the way that you see users interacting on those platforms. You could argue Minecraft too, but
Grand Theft Auto.
You could say GTA. And by the way, we totally missed a super controversial topic on GTA. Somebody that asked me, did a lot of the people that, big distinction between protesters and looters here, right? But, was looting more prominent and trained by GTA? Somebody asked me that question recently. I didn't really know how to respond to that question, to be frank with you.
Looting, art imitates life. Looting was invented a long time ago.
Yeah, and I think that's fair.
The Vikings were early looters, and now they make Clash of Clans. I mean,
Vikings, man. It's interesting. I think that those are probably the best positioned groups to go after the metaverse right now. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think in the short term, I think defining what is a game and what is digital experience is going to be very interesting. If you look at the Fortnite concerts or the movies that I'm now showing, I think they're even doing a Black Lives Matter, something like that, protest or presentation on the Fortnite platform coming up. So that's incredibly exciting as a way to leverage their power and leverage their audience. But I think we're going to see a lot of music companies try to figure out how to build the best digital experiences and present them to an audience. Meanwhile, the game companies are going to continue to innovate. So there's going to be a lot of people kind of aiming towards that metaverse concept. What happens is that a personal expression of you, or is it a role-playing expression? I think bring up GTA 5 and GTA 5 mods. It's very interesting to see what's happening in that space. And there's a lot of role-playing games that are happening on all the big kind of MMOs right now. So what that looks like over time, it's hard for me to define. Obviously, reading sci-fi is a great way to open up your mind and expand and think about what's going to happen there. But smart people are going to continue to innovate that way. I think games are going to be continue to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah, I think the metaverse is what people from outside the games industry call the games industry, right?
Yeah.
And my philosophy is if it wasn't on Star Trek, it's just simply not going to happen. So if the metaverse is the holodeck, then I believe it's possible and it's on its way. But otherwise, I'm not there yet.
Can we expand it to Ender's Game too? What's in there in that whole series? I don't know if we have any Ender's Game fans on here, but that's interesting. Star Trek. So Star Trek's the North Star we're shooting after, David. That's what I heard you say.
I think all the way back when the Motorola invented the flip phone, I think you can see that, and now we're doing Zoom calls, right? So it's all whoever those authors were, they were writing the future, and that's where every kind of engineer that came through school said, I've got to crack that. I've seen it on Star Trek. How do we do it?
So we need to all study all the Star Trek episodes, see what technology hasn't actually come to fruition yet. We're all going to invest in that together. That's our next $1 billion idea. I think
that's it.
There have been crazier investment processes probably than that, I'll be honest. But that's a sound strategy. I like it. Joe, I actually have a question for you, for us, to maybe to ask really. What do you think you would hope would be a little different for games-focused VCs? I mean, you're a founder in this, so to flip it back on you, what's something you're hoping for that you think would change in the next couple of years, or something you think we could be doing better?
So I actually think that from my perspective, just more transparency in terms of documenting the thinking, documenting your processes, just having more online. So I have this, I believe in this concept of kind of personal branding as well as organizational branding. And so kind of similar to, there are certain firms like NFX that I think are starting to move in this direction where they're just putting a lot online, a lot of their thoughts online. And I think that would be very helpful, just so that as startups are looking for investors, that they really will know you really well, and there's going to be a lot of information readily available to really understand who you are, the philosophies, the approach, all that kind of stuff. I think that would be helpful.
And how much of that, probably jumping back into a controversial statement, but how much of that do you think is authentic versus more just literal branding? Because I feel like all of us are pretty authentic people, but I think when we think about projecting ourselves into that space, like the winners in that space are people that are super self-promotional, probably don't know what they're talking about most of the time. Like, let's be honest, like that there's a lot of jokes about VC Twitter for a reason, because that's how people kind of get recognized and get content. I think we want to be more authentic in terms of that, but maybe social platforms aren't the best way to do it. So maybe, JK, is there a better way for us to express ourselves there?
I actually would hope for a world where we actually get to see like real world deals or presentations, or like even like, you know, when you're coming up with a term sheet, like how you're thinking about it. And then I would even like hope for an investor like with us as, you know, if you know, starting a company, and if we're getting investment, where we could actually film us talking to our lawyers and putting that online just for other people to see. Sorry?
That's a deconstructor of gaming VC. That's great.
But yeah, that would be my hope, Jason. But,
okay.
Yeah.
Joe, you should sell that to Netflix. That sounds like an interesting Silicon Valley episode or something, you know? Honestly, it's super interesting.
Actually, you can just watch Silicon Valley, and that answers most of it.
Unfortunately, truer than true.
I know, it's unfortunately it's truer than you'd hope.
It's HBO, not Netflix, but nevertheless, it's still it's painfully close to the mark.
Oh man.
All right. Well, on that note, I think that's it. So maybe, do you guys have any final message for our audience? You know, I think it'd be great to hear how, if there are entrepreneurs out there that are interested in contacting you, how would they get in touch with you? Or if you're going to be at a digital conference or something, how they can see you guys?
Yeah, I mean, well, of course, if the best way is through a credible link, because there is a lot of noise. I try to explain to people, we're not trying to like be difficult or non-transparent. It's just the amount of noise, and separating signal from noise is really tough. So one way to do that is a credible referral. But I mean, the usual ways of LinkedIn, and you know, there are all kinds of conferences, and Deconstructor are fun, and you know, you can hit up our website, londonvp.com, and see things. But I guess what I want to encourage the entrepreneurs to understand is that it is a long journey that's, you know, filled with ups and downs. So there has to be a tenacity to accept the amount of, and failure is a terrible word. It's the learning moments of how you have to have cause and effect. You break something to understand how to fix it. And yeah, you build yourself up, but you really, I think that's also a journey together with the investors. So ideally you're with investors that of course you respect, but you enjoy, and that will work with you on that, and will, you know, collectively help pick you up and help you find the path. And that's what I'm looking forward to. That's why what I'm doing and what I enjoy is sharing my knowledge with people, and that keeps me learning, because they're bringing new things to the party. That's why I feel so excited about what I get to do. And I do it in a domain that I've spent my whole life. And I love that kind of continuous circle. So yeah, just, you know, want to be encouraging, but realistic. That's what I'm trying to message.
Jason?
Okay. Yeah, I would just, you know, completely agree. And, you know, would also just encourage you guys. We've passed on founders multiple times that have just kept coming back to us, and then we actually invested. So as an encouragement, it's never final and over. And you know, what we try to do in those situations, if we think there's a potential, is say, hey, these are the things that are missing. Come back to us when maybe this is complete or finished. And they have, and to the credit of some founders, they've been very persistent. And one of them literally made us invest in them because they did everything we said. And they kind of made us a presentation and said, you said to do all these 10 things, we did them. And we were like, you're right. And so I got to put my money where my mouth is. And so I would encourage you guys there. You know, you can reach us either through our portfolio, talk to maybe a company in our portfolio that does something that's tangential to what you guys are doing. You know, that's a great way to come into our network, or just reach out to us directly on LinkedIn. We do get a lot of people reaching out to us on LinkedIn, an email, or go through our website, Konvoy Ventures, konvoy.vc. So yeah, excited to hear from you guys. And, you know, I don't think you can go wrong if you apply to all three of us too. So go for it.
Yeah. Similar echoes. You can find us on any of the social media sites, LinkedIn, our own website. I think as far as like final words of encouragement messaging is like, we are investors and we are venture capital investors, and venture capital isn't the right fit for every business and every games business particularly. Yeah. So like just because we are not interested in a particular idea or a particular pitch doesn't mean that you could be wildly successful in your own definition of success. I think it's also hard because I feel like games is a mix of arts and entertainment. People often feel like we're making a judgment on the creation of their art, which is difficult because there's a subjective layer of opinion there. So like there are games companies that come to me and pitch a game, and I'm like, I would play that game for hours. Please make it as soon as possible. And they're like, great, do you want to invest? And I'm like, absolutely not. So it's very hard for us to sometimes express why you might not be a good fit for venture capital, might be a good fit for the types of business model, the types of returns that we ourselves are seeking as investors. But keep in mind, like, we're all just huge game fans, and I think we all want kind of a rising tide for the industry, and we're just trying to partner with the best teams that fit our criteria, both in the learning in the learning cycle, as David was describing. We like to learn with our founders and industries and subsegments and subgenres that are really exciting. And then in terms of just the type of businesses they're going after, we think are highly scalable, likely to create a massive return for both us, the founders, and our investors. I think that's the stuff that really gets us excited, and we think there's never been a better time. There's more mass market opportunities for game companies to see now and today than there was 10 years ago. And likely there will be even more opportunities 5 years from now than there are today. So I think we're just on a continual upswing, hopefully, and that will advantage every founder that's working in the industry.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you very much, guys, for your time. I really appreciated this conversation. It was super interesting. And yeah, that's basically it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye, everyone. Good to see you all.